Good morning. It's just about 11:59 on this fairly sunny Sunday morning, and this I'm delighted to bring you the historical panel. The biographies are on the site, so I won't spend time because you will learn as we go along the things that make our panelists unique. So I have a question that I back in the day, went to Dr. Challoner's girls' school in Little Chalfont in Buckinghamshire. And the syllabus at the time for history was all about dates. And I have a terrible memory. My dad had a improve your memory on CD, and I say I've got it, but I can't remember what I've done with it. So I remember getting 2% in a history exam. So I'm not a huge, I shouldn't say this in front of
No.
my peers. Um, so the basic question is why choose his, because this is a genres panel, why choose historical? Alison, I'll start with you at the beginning of the alphabet.
Okay.
Why
Well,
did you choose historical over any other genre as your main genre?
okay. Um, I've always been a history nut, specifically a Roman nut, because my father was, and we traveled all over Roman Europe since I was about 7. And to me, it's quite normal. And when you touch a piece of concrete that somebody laid 2,000 years ago, and you're looking at the same sky and the hills, or you go somewhere that Pliny wrote about and the landscape is basically the same,
Mm.
how can you not like history? And also, the other thing is, who are these people? Did they live differently? What were they like? I was only 11 when I saw my first Roman mosaic, and I thought, what about the mummies and the children? What did they do? Because we all know about Romans, big tough guys.
Mhm.
And my father turned around and said, well, what do you think? What do you think they did? And I was fired. And that was that. I was it. And history has been my whole life. I
Wow.
always want to know why. And so I did a master's late in life. I went back because I hadn't finished with history.
Mm.
And it to me it's quite normal. It's very sad, really, isn't it? So
Yes.
the
Oh, good for
fiction,
you.
the fiction side, I started with alternate history because I wanted to have a tough heroine. With all the best will in world, it was a paternalistic society, and so I read Robert Harris's Fatherland and thought, "Oh, you can twist history, yippee!" So I wrote those books, and then my fans wanted me to go back and said, "Will you please go back to the fourth century and write the foundation stuff?" Oh my God, no, don't do historical fiction. I do history.
Right.
You have to write it, please. So Julia Prima, one of the starters of the dynasty,
Mm.
the late fourth century is extremely interesting. It's a big pivotal time in European history. I mean, what's not to like? So that's why, and it's a relatively unknown period because everybody thinks of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and blah blah blah.
Mm.
Nobody looks at the towards the end, the cusp of the Roman Empire.
Mm.
And contrary to the film, it did not all collapse in one day.
Right.
So there you are. Sorry, that's a bit of a
No, it's
long-winded
okay.
one, but
No, 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 it's impressive. John, how about you?
Um, I write it because I love reading it. I mean, I also write contemporary fiction and crime fiction, but I write historical fiction because I love that's I started writing it because I love reading it, but also because I write my historical fiction is about the poor, the people at the bottom of the social heap.
Mm.
Um, you have to work a bit harder to get real information about them. I spend a lot of time in archives. Um, but I wanted to show something of, I, I said I like reading this, but also I was brought up from the earliest age with people telling me stories about the past, my grandparents talking about the past,
Mm.
my mother, who lived to be 103, talking about the past, and the people they talked about, they were miners, uh, domestic servants, and I couldn't find books about those people. It was Catherine Cookson, I suppose, but
Mm.
there weren't many. And I wanted to write them. And some of the stories I'd been told, I wanted to get those stories down. Like there's a character in one of my books, in my first historical, actually, A Just and Upright Man, a character called Sticky Bainbridge. And Sticky Bainbridge is there in the 1760s in the northeast of England. And he's called Sticky because he has a wooden leg. Now, there really was a Sticky Bainbridge, and he really was called Sticky because he had a wooden leg, but he actually lived in Southmoor in County Durham in the 1920s. But I'd heard so many stories about people like, I wanted to tell those stories, and they're stories about people in the past. And I wanted to show what life had been like. For example, enclosures. We wouldn't have the life we have today if enclosures had not taken place. But the price they demanded was huge, and the people who paid it were the poor, the people I'm descended from. So that's how I got into writing historical fiction.
Because there are a lot of non-fiction books. I just think I can't remember the author, but I wouldn't say non-fiction because they are sort of almost between a fictionalized version
Yes, I know what you
of
mean.
the workhouse. You have a lot of workhouse, and I think with any kind of book, it's about the battles, isn't it? They were surrounded, they had to battle every single day. Now, Ronan, your Regency.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So, well, first of all, I want to say, as a former history teacher, that I think you were taught history wrong, really. So, I mean, that's the traditional old ways. And I think nowadays, to engage students, we try to get them to feel how it was like living back in those days. But I've always been interested in history. Back as a child in the USA, I always loved Civil War and really old things. And then I moved to the UK, and history is all around. It's just so exciting to actually see living history, evidence of the Romans, evidence of everything since those times, and it's all around us. I was really into family history, and I was doing a lot of research on that. And that's how I kind of came upon my set of novels that I'm doing. It's based on the life of a real life actress in Regency times. And like you were saying, John, there's a lot of people whose lives have kind of been disappeared over time. And for me, I've kind of really gotten interested in women's history because I think that's been suppressed over time. So my main character is a woman, and I've been researching and trying to glean pieces of her life. And as you said, John, a lot of those things are not in evidence. And even though she was an actress and she was really well known at the time, there's scant evidence of her real life and what it is. I went on a course that was run by the Guardian newspaper called Fiction Based on Family History. And that really kind of helped me to think, okay, I don't need all the facts. I can start to use fiction to fill in those gaps of things that I don't know about. So the course leader that we had said, fiction can go to the places that facts cannot. So I was using that as my inspiration to go forward. And I felt like this young lady who was an actress had a great story to tell. So I feel really impassioned by that. And so I'm working on a series to get her whole life down so people can read about it. She lived an exciting life. Not quite like Bridgerton, but it's not far from it.
You can imagine the glamour.
Yeah.
Especially in the arts, in the theatre.
Definitely. She lived in a kind of unique netherworld, kind of between, not quite impoverished, but not quite wealthy, but she could glimpse at the wealthy, and she was portraying both characters, portraying poor people. She was one of the first Cinderellas, and portraying, great princesses and queens and wealthy people. So it's an interesting world to explore, and I really enjoy doing the research a little bit too much. I need to get back, buckle down the writing. But,
now, Trish, I've left you till last because you write over various historical periods?
I do. I don't go back further than sort of late Victorian, early Edwardian. But unlike the others, the rest of the panel, I didn't like history at school. I think it was probably my worst subject, but I think perhaps that was because it was dull. And it was only when I actually started reading historical fiction that I started really feeling interested in how things were. But it was kind of more sort of the romance of it, the fashion, the dances, the balls. And so for me, I suppose because I love writing about fashion, I like doing that, but I also have a theme of friendship in my books, and it's usually a poor person that become really good friends with um, daughter of a lord or daughter of a baronet or wife of a baronet, and they actually become really close friends. So sort of breaking the class boundaries. I like doing that. My first book was House of Grace. Whoops, can't see it.
Yeah, we can see it on the back. That's okay. Yeah, it's right in front of you.
Right. That was inspired by quite a few things, because I was doing an Open University course in humanities with creative writing, and for my final assignment, I had to do a screenplay, and so I was also doing a GCSE English, because coming from working class, I left school at 15 and had to go to work because my father was disabled and we had a big family. So while that's doing the GCSE, we looked at George Orwell's Road to Wigan Pier. So I thought, okay, I had a character. I've got a coal miner's wife. And then, you remember House of Elliot, anyone, with the fashion on TV?
Two sisters. One was called Beth, I think.
That and Mr. Selfridge all brought House of Grace, because so it began as a screenplay, but part 2 when Grace was married and as a mature woman. But by the time I finished that, I thought, hang on here, there's so much to write here. I could write a novel and start from when Grace was 16 and made her the daughter of a lord marrying a coal miner.
Right. Was Alison, you have something similar in the House of... Oh, no, that's you. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking about the differences, because especially you've got the 2 levels there, Trish. And John, you've got... I say in any kind of book, we were talking about this in the children's this morning, the 4 E's. So readers like to be educated, to learn something new, to feel some kind of emotion. And I think if you've got the poorhouse, the workhouse, or the elite, you feel some kind of emotion. There should be always an emotional pull, because, as we say, we put our characters up a tree and throw rocks at them, and it's the journey from the start to the finish of the book that we want them to be okay by the end of the book.
Another writer that I have a lot of time for once said to me, it doesn't matter what any of your books appear to be about, in the end they're all about love.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot in that.
Yeah. Mine are love, romance, friendship, and always a lot of heartbreak as well, unfortunately.
Oh, I think we need heartbreak.
You do.
Definitely.
You do, without also, any question.
You need one of in Julia Prima. She's quite a bit of a spoilt girl from a good privileged background, and she falls in love. Blah blah blah. Guy goes back to Rome. And she said, right, I'm going to go to Rome and get him. And she expects everything she can't help it. That's how she's brought up. She expects it all to fall into place. Well, she learns through incredible hardship of the 4th century Rome, the Roman Empire, which is crumbling, multi-danger from every side. She learns to grow up, basically. Right. And I think you need to take your character on a journey. Yes. And she's a much nicer person at the end of it. I mean... don't humiliate her, but she sort of becomes a great deal more considerate of other people. And I think you need that.
I had a lodger once who'd had everything. They had servants, and she was based in Africa before she came to the UK. So people around her did everything for her.
Yeah.
And I would get home to windows open because she would open a window and somebody else would come, and this is detracting from what we were talking about. But it's interesting how you think
that's
back
quite
in the
natural
day.
to them. Quite
Yeah.
natural.
Yes, it's yes.
But that's something else. When we go back into history, we have to not have, well, why hasn't she shut the window thing? We have to,
Yes.
because you had a servant or a slave in Roman times. Sorry, that's a whole area. You just have to accept it. It's there.
Yes.
And that slave would sort of be there to fasten your sandals or unfasten them when you went to dine. They would automatically look after your clothes. And although the subject, the person, the principal, if you like, didn't think anything cruelly necessarily, that was just normal. And for us to get into that mindset is quite hard. Anyway, so I've probably gone off on a tangent.
No, it's fine. There's obviously you're writing historical, so you've got to base a fair portion of although you're writing fiction. Your Mark Twain said, "Truth is stranger than fiction." I'll start with Ronan because you are inspired by true events. Have you ever found something in your research, whether it's your personal history or online for that era, that you think, I can't include this because no one's going to believe it?
Yes, I don't know. I've learned to kind of use these kinds of strange historical things that really, really did happen to guide my writing and kind of put a framework into what I'm writing. And I don't worry, either you can believe it or not. But I think for my case, kind of looking at the world of the theater and the circles that this young lady was going in in the third novel, she's in Brighton and she actually goes to Brighton Pavilion. She's invited to meet Prince George, and you think, oh yeah, no, that will never happen. Later on, people will realize she marries really well. So she marries above her station, and it's through her connection with her husband to be that she actually gets these invitations into the upper class, into another world. And I think a lot of people will think, oh, that's where the fiction comes in. But there is a lot of truth. I could see her doing that. I don't have absolute irrefutable proof, but King George IV was ultimately the godfather to her first son. So it happened.
I've never left anything out, but I've had people email or message me or write to me saying, you made that up. The thing that comes to mind right now is I wrote about something. Enclosures started in the south of England, and by the time they reached the north of England or the northeast of England, a lot of the problems were evident. And Parliament had passed a law to say that everyone who was thrown off the land, everyone who lost the right to common land and the various rights that went with that, had to be given a plot of land of their own. It was their allotment. That's where the word allotment comes from.
Okay.
And I wrote a scene where each enclosure was an individual act of Parliament, and I wrote a scene where the act of Parliament for this particular enclosure said that every allotment had to be fenced. And the poor people, the people who had the small allotments, they had to pay not only to fence their own allotment, but also to fence the very large allotments given to people like the Bishop of Durham, who was possibly the biggest landowner in that area, and certainly the most unpleasant. And of course, they couldn't afford to do that. So the big landowners would say, well, never you mind, we'll give you a couple of pounds for your allotment, and we'll pay for the fencing. And essentially they were saying, we'll have all the land forever and ever, and you won't have any, and you'll have to leave, and that's all right, because you'll probably have to go down the pit, and then you'll be dead in 6 months. So it doesn't matter anyway. And people wrote to me and said, more than one person wrote to me and said, you made that up, that bit about paying to fence. Well, I didn't make it up. I found it in more than one, in the history of more than one enclosure in the Northeast. It was a scandalous thing to do, but it is what happened. So people would say, and somebody else said to me, I had these farm labourers in the 1760s drinking tea, and somebody said to me, they wouldn't have been able to afford tea. They wouldn't have. Well, of course they drank tea. They didn't drink the tea that had been brought into the country legally and duty paid, because that was very expensive. The tea they bought had come in through places like Whitby, and no duty had been paid on it. No customs man had been anywhere near it, but of course they drank tea.
But it's fascinating, that kind of detail makes our historical fiction come to life.
Yes.
And we can drip those
I think
things
so,
in.
yes.
And
I think
it
so.
really gives us a fantastic flavour of the time. And I know I've had people have written to me in the same way about my alternate history and say, oh, that didn't happen. No, it's alternative.
John, oh, sorry. John, you mentioned about not leaving anything out. I know you're no shrinking violet. I think I can say that and you not get angry with me. But was there anything you found out? Because like crime, historical can be gritty. We know that gritty things happened in history. Was there anything, I mean, you've said you don't leave anything out, but is there anything you think, actually, that's just a step too far for the...
Well, yes, actually, what I should have said was, I never leave anything out just because people might think you made that up.
Right.
But there are things that you think, this is so unpleasant. I personally don't want to write, and there are things I don't write about.
There are things that are facts that I think are so boring that you need to leave them out. And I've made the mistake of worrying about it. So, for example, stage lighting, I was worried about what kind of stage lighting was it candles, or did they have argon gas light? I spent a whole day researching to just write the line, and she was amazed by the brilliance of the argon lamps. Why did I do that?
That's the danger with historical fiction. You do so much research that you think, I must get this down on the page. I must tell people about this, because otherwise that time has been wasted. I could spend 2 days in the Durham archives and end up perhaps with one sentence, perhaps with nothing.
It's, I think doing the research, you feel you're there more. So when you are writing it, even though you're not actually talking all about that, if somebody said something, at least you know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the 2 days in the archives are not wasted.
Yeah.
No.
They've given you information, but it stays up here.
Yeah. But it's a story, so you don't want to slow down the story with loads of facts, because, you know.
I guess for me, I think the biggest fear is somebody's going to say, like you were saying, John, this is wrong, and you want to be able to prove that's right. I researched it.
Yes.
But there is a fine line, isn't there, between, I know I say I edit for the 100th reader, because there are 99 readers don't notice, but one, there will always be someone who will. And there'll always be a 100th reader who would like to know what kind of lighting there was, how long the trajectory from a bullet from the gun to the impacting the body. But as Tricia just perfectly said, it would get in the way of the plot. You want it to be seamless. You don't want anything that will draw the reader out out from the story. We've got Helen A.A. Abbott has said, what I love about historical fiction is that I feel like I've travelled back in time when I read it. I'm not sure I'd like to do that in real life. I'll start with you, Tricia. Oh, we've got another question, so it's just bumped up. Which historical era would you have liked to have lived in? And is it one you write about?
I'm actually quite glad I didn't live back then. I loved, as I say, early Edwardian and late Victorian, where they're doing all the balls and the lovely fashion. But actually, I think I'd rather just be it for a while, be that person for a while. But like, did you say Helen said about escaping back in time? That is why I write. I like escaping back in time or anywhere really. I like to be anyone I want to be. It just gives me that time to actually just drift off, forget all the problems, and I'm in there immersed, and I'm no longer me, I'm someone else.
That is you've used the perfect word. That's the fourth E, is that with John's, if the reader's reading how tough life was back then, it's a form of escape. Actually, my life's not so bad because I could have had it tough. Alison and the Regency and the sort of the higher upper tier of the wonderful life is still a form of escape, because you're imagining you don't have the ability to know what it's like, and especially going back in time, you don't know what it's like to live in that era. But it's a lovely escape to have all these beautiful clothes and so on. Alison, which era would you live in?
Everybody always expects me to say Roman, but no. I mean, lovely to go on a time travel with there. And of course, I would like to be at the top of the level, because being a slave or a mine worker or a field worker, or even one of the more privileged slaves, even in the imperial palace, not good. And as a woman, I could have run a business, I could have property, but it would still all technically belong to my husband, brother, father, etc., etc. You were very regulated. I mean, not like those poor Greek women, but that was absolutely awful. And there were quite a lot of powerful women. But personally, I prefer to go to the dentist and the doctor, and okay, they had drains, but only in the best houses, and know that I'm going to be safe when I go out and I can drive around. No, I'll stay where I am. Thank you very much. But I'll visit.
All right, Ronan, are you tempted to travel back to Regency?
Yeah, I have to agree with Alison. It's great to visit, but I wouldn't want to live in those circumstances. Regency, I think that would be interesting to see, but the Regency we tend to read about is only the upper 1%. And, I work at kind of getting a glimpse of what the lower classes were, the working classes were having to deal with. And people were dying of simple diseases that could be treated nowadays, dysentery and, tuberculosis and all kinds of things, at young ages. And it was a hard life. I think kind of going back, there was such a regimented society. You had to fit into these kinds of roles. And I would find that very difficult. I think, I'm more of the type of, can I, work and show and prove myself to kind of earn a living and a level of respect. And that was hard to do back in the days. If you were born at a certain level, you stayed at that level. So yeah, I'd rather stay where I am. Thank you.
If you're a woman, you were definitely bottom.
Well, John, I'm imagining you wouldn't want to have lived in your novels, but
you're right.
You're right.
I'm probably the oldest person here. I was born during the Second World War. I'm 83 next month. And I've always felt that I belong to the luckiest generation, at least in this country.
Wow.
We had it better than anyone before us, and we had it better than anyone after us. So I'd like to stay where I am. For a number of the reasons are the same as Alison's. I was at the hospital a little while ago. It turned out there was nothing the matter, but it was very good to have somebody say there's nothing the matter. And somebody that you could trust, and that they weren't going to apply some horrible. Apart from which, if you you don't have to go back very far in time to find that the world is a very smelly place and the people who live in it are very smelly people. I just wouldn't want to put up with that.
Denise, we've got, I believe it was Doris Lessing who said fiction makes a better job of the truth, which for me is the great appeal of historical fiction. Have any of you, or would any of you, write your family history as fiction? So we'll go with Ronan, because you have done. You have. Are there any other aspects of your family you think you'd not, maybe a different era or the same era that you found?
I mean, one of the reasons I got into writing fiction is I'm adopted, so I didn't know about my family history, and so my wife is her father was one of 5 generations of Church of England vicars. So his life was well documented and all the family was. So it made it easy whenever my journey was difficult of trying to find out about things. In the meantime, I have learned my family history. So that's been really interesting. And there's stories there. I've written a short story about my Swedish great-great-great-grandfather who was sent to prison. And it was really interesting. So, I think, for me, it's been a way of bringing the people's memory back to life. These forgotten characters, this woman that I'm writing about had lived the most amazing life, and yet she's forgotten to history and nobody knows about her. So I wanted to breathe life into it in the best way that I could. And fiction was the way of kind of filling in the gaps from all the facts that I had gathered. So I'm going to continue doing that. I found some really amazing, interesting characters over history. Like you were saying, fact can be stranger than fiction sometimes. So I found a lot of strange stories in the past that I'm kind of itching to write about. And so that's kind of the future that I'm going to look at. And also, maybe doing a little bit of a memoir of my adoption story, because I think a lot of people can learn from that, particularly people that are in a similar situation as myself and not knowing about their past. Maybe that's why I'm so passionate about history. I don't know, is that I had that history kind of kept from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Patricia, have you written, they say write what you know, have you pulled pieces from your history?
Absolutely, all the time. I mean, Grace in House of Grace, she was inspired by my mum, and Jack was inspired by my dad, because although my mum wasn't a daughter of a lord, she was a lot better off than what my dad was, and he was really lower working class. And so they came in together there. And in the book I'm working on at the moment, it's actually a historical romance, and it's inspired by my mum and my dad, but I have fictionalized it so that it's not them anymore. And my mum was Jewish, and she married a Protestant, an Irish Protestant. And so sort of like I have a Jewish girl and I have a Catholic man, and the obstacles they're going to have to face to actually be together. And I kind of think it's no longer my mum and dad, because I don't want to put anything about them there, but I know I can use things. And to me, it's kind of like a tribute to my mum and dad, really, that. So that's called Jim Slip Bride, and I hope to have that finished within a year.
Alison?
Yeah, I do know some things about my own family. We were Huguenots who came over in the 1500s from Catholic persecution. Sorry about the Catholics. But they were 5 families. They're all recorded, first of all, in parish records, and then obviously in the official records. And they weren't anything amazing. They were sort of weavers and traders and, I suppose, artisans, that kind of skilled person. And really, up until the Second World War, there were 5 families, and that was it. Come the Second World War, people moved around hugely, and my father's one of his family was based in Hastings, St Leonard's, and met my mother who came from Durham. So, there's a contrast. But a lot of them went and served the empire, or, one was in Tasmania with the growing apples, and one was in Lucknow during the Indian Mutiny, one was in Africa during the Zulu Wars. They sort of went off and did their thing that young men of that period did. My other grandmother, she had a furrier's business in Newcastle, and that was set up. Now I'm going to be very personal here. If you go to the National Portrait Gallery and look at the head of a certain house that was based at Alnwick Castle in the northeast, and you look at a portrait of my grandmother, the likeness is extremely similar. And my grandmother's mother, was Mrs. Williams, and there was no Mr. Williams, and she was the housekeeper at Alnwick. And there's a bit of wrong side of the blanketry there. So that's quite interesting, but whether I write about it, and nobody's to say anything about this, please. It's one of those family things.
It's only going out to whoever goes on the internet.
Well, that's fine then. That's fine.
But I mean, you could write, because I like the fact that people say, especially to top authors, they go, "I've read everything you've ever written," and they go, "No, I've not published everything I've ever written."
No.
Maybe your closet bottom drawer book.
Yeah.
John, we have a comment for you from Beth. I agree with John about smells of the past.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I think was it Birmingham that had trouble with that. They'd either the refuse, what do we call them these days? Refuse collectors back in the past.
Night soil men.
Something like that.
Oh, this is modern.
So the recycling engineers, or whatever they're called, bin men. I think either they'd gone on strike, or there was something overlap of contract. Somebody had pulled out a couple of different councils, and the rubbish had stacked up and for several weeks.
Yeah.
And I've got one. Do any of the panelists? I'll start with you, John, because then we'll if you could answer the family, and do any of the panelists acknowledge their research sources at the end of the novel? So, John, on those two, whether you include the family.
Well, yes. At the end of A Just and Upright Man, which is the first book in my Blakiston historical fiction series, I have a section how historically accurate is A Just and Upright Man, and I say where some of this came from. For example, it's in all the textbooks you can read that there were no workhouses in the northeast of England until well into the 1830s, and yet I was in the Durham archives, and I was reading through the account book of Ryton Parish, Ryton, that's Ryton in Durham, which is where my books are set. And in the 1790s, 40 years before this was supposed to happen, it listed all of the paupers of the parish and said they'd all been offered the house and they'd all refused, so they would get no more money. And I happened to know that the woman on the counter in the archives that day had done her doctorate had been based on Ryton Parish. So I went to her and I said, "Hey, I understood there were etc., etc." And she said, "Yes, that's right." And I said, "Well, what's this?" And I showed it to her, and she was looking at the page, and she'd got her hands on it, and she was gently taking it away from me. And she had the grace to say, "I'll get a paper out of this." And I thought, it's been on your, don't you ever, you
read your own books?
So yes, I actually say where this came from, and I give if anybody wants to look at it, I give the reference, the Durham Archives reference, so you can find it easily enough.
And do you include, John, your own family? Have there been family?
Well, I do, but I'm not explicit about it. I give those stories to other people, but the stories I have, um, I'm a bit like Ronan in that I've done quite a lot of family history, genealogy. The reason I started on that was the discovery that the man who brought me up wasn't my biological father, and in fact, my biological father never saw me because he was shot down over Germany a couple of months before I was born. And I wanted to find out more about where it was I came from. I did a DNA test, which produced some very interesting results. With a name like mine, you think you're half Irish. I've got almost no Irish blood at all, and I've got a hell of a lot that isn't from these islands either. So I wanted to know more about that. And that leads me to ask, Alison, when you were looking at the Huguenots, did you find any Davids or Davids or Sullivans in there?
Oh, it was only the records in the local parish church which recorded the members of the families.
Was it the French? Was it what they called the French church in Kent?
This was at Hollingbourne in the Wood, which is near Hastings.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's a church about that big, a little tiny parish church. So no, it wasn't in there. It was
I
just
went
the
back and
parish
found
records.
a guy called a Huguenot weaver called Mathurin David, who by the time he died had changed his name to Martin David, and his daughter married a guy and another weaver called John James Sullivan, and that's where I get the name of that's where I get the name I write crime fiction under J.J. Sullivan. Anyway, so yes, I use those stories, Morgan, but I scatter them around other people.
We actually have minus 1 minute.
Oh,
so we'll go Patricia, Alison, then Ronan to answering the question about research. Do you include any of your research findings in the backs of your book?
No, I haven't actually. As it's a fiction book, I've never really considered that it was necessary. Obviously, when I've done all my essays and academic stuff for the university and everything, I'd had enough of references, to be quite honest, and I don't think I actually need the references in a fiction book. I've never seen any references in a fiction book.
No, I think unless it's of particular wealth to others, as John has. Alison?
No, I don't. I put a historical note in,
and
then I might sort of bring in quote somebody from something else.
Yeah.
I think really people would like to know the generality. I sometimes put a glossary in, and I sometimes put place names with Roman Latin names and current names, but I've never actually listed not a formal bibliography. I did in my non-fiction book, which was my MA dissertation turned into a book, but 200 academic references written in HTML in those days. That wasn't fun. But no, I mean, it depends. I think if it's a big tome, maybe like some of the Edward Rutherford ones, I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, not generally.
Yeah, if you quote someone, you would, but
exactly. With an historical note, I'll say, as blogs says, blah, 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 or whatever. Yeah.
Ronan, the last word is yours.
Yeah. What I've done in the last page of my book is I tend to put bonus material on my website. So for anybody who is interested, if you're not interested, that's fine. You can just take the story as it is. But in the bonus kind of web page that I kind of do, I go over the reasonings and what is completely 100% fact and where I got those facts from. Not in academic detail, but I will say, I researched the theater logbooks at the British Library or whatever, or I got this from a newspaper article and kind of go over what is definite fact. And then I will also talk about what I may have embellished, what is a little bit more fictional. So for example, in my first book, Dido Bell, who is a very famous woman of African origin, but she was in her father was a very wealthy family, and the film Dido was made. She's a character in one of my first books, so I kind of explain why I drew her into the novel for a brief chapter, and she makes kind of a cameo appearance, but I had reasonings for that. But I kind of explained that she's not technically, I don't have any evidence of that, but she went to the same church as my main character, so there is a chance that they could have met together.
Because we often have people helping us, don't we, if we're stuck on a particular subject. So we have acknowledgements invariably at the back of back of our books. So we say thank you. So I shall say thank you,
Thank you.
To Trish, Trisha, Alison, John, and Ronan. Thank you so much for joining me today, and our other 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 participants asking questions. And I love it when they're clapping at the end and giving little hearts and things. It's fabulous. So thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Take care.